Hi everyone, and welcome back to another installment of Talking Trees with Lee. My name is Lee Rumble, your local Knox County Extension Agent and ISA Certified Arborist. Today we're here in a greenhouse and we're going to look at a little bit of how to best select our nursery stock. Now, if you've been to a big box store or a common nursery, you probably know there's three primary ways in which we receive these nursery items. The most common is of course going to be these container grown individuals. Now this is a very beneficial way to grow plants, of course, because we can plant these species most any time of year. You know, if they are in a container, generally they're going to have a really well established root system, and as long as we get them planted in a good soil in a really nice area that's suitable for that species, we can expect them to thrive. Now, one common issue that I see with container grown plants, as you probably already know, are those girdling roots or the encircling roots that commonly will form after a plant has spent many years in a container. Now, when you do see that, I don't want you to fear it necessarily unless it's just a tremendous amount of girdling roots, because a lot of times, you know, we can encourage new root growth by fairly aggressively severing some of the actual root mass. Trees don't actually mind too much of a disturbance to their soil, their roots when they're young, so I would encourage you to go ahead and cut through some of those roots and break those root systems apart. Another common way that we receive our nursery stock is also what are known as bare root trees. Now, I'm a huge fan of planting bare root trees because we don't have to deal with the issues of encircling roots. Yes, your nursery stock is going to start out quite a bit smaller. These are commonly referred to as whips or just saplings. But if you put this in the ground and you plant it well, this tree will actually surprise you with regards to how quickly it actually grows. And then the third and final is probably a little bit larger than what I can lift up, but that is, of course, our balled and burlap trees. Now, commonly at a big nursery, you'll see 2.5 to 4 inch caliper trees that have, of course, a burlap sack and a wire container. Now, they can be good to put into a mature space, but do realize that many of our balled and burlap species, of course, are undergoing some transplant shock. They may have grown up on a farm many miles away. When we dig through those roots, that certainly does shock that plant. So make sure you're looking at those roots to see if they're nice and healthy. Now, I mentioned that container grown plants commonly will get those girdling or encircling roots, and I think on this juniper species is a great example of that. If we look closely, we see numerous compact root system in here, many of which have developed at the base of what was a square container, and we see that this is a very hard root ball. So this is a species that, of course, we probably would want to look closely at before purchasing. We want to look for nice, white, fibrous, healthy roots, not these darkened, discolored roots that really are bound up against one another. Now, yes, you could nurse this back to health, but if you were to look at the top of this plant, you would quickly realize that this is not one that you want as a result of what's happening in the pot. So I encourage you to look at those roots, pull that plant up, make sure our roots are healthy, nice, they should be a light color, ideally a white, and they should be vigorously growing. Now, another thing I want you to look out for when you're purchasing nursery stock is, of course, what is known as the trunk taper. So we want to look for trees that have really well-developed taper, and that just means that flaring at the base of the tree. This tells me, number one, that the tree is likely planted at an appropriate level, as opposed to a situation like this where we see likely this tree is a little bit deep. I don't notice any flare on this. And if we dig down, we do start to see some of that trunk taper, but it's a good 1/2 inch to 1 inch below the actual grade of the topsoil here in the pot. Another thing I want you to be on the lookout for are the graft unions. Many of our ornamental plants are, of course, grafted onto a different root stock. So we have what's known as the scion, the part of the plant that we want, and it's commonly grafted onto some form of rootstock. And that can be for many different reasons. Sometimes it's for hybrid vigor, so a little additional growth. It can be for pest or disease resistance, or it can just be for cold hardiness. There's various reasons why we select nursery stock. our rooting stock when we're selecting our species. Now, what's important is to look at that graft union. We want to find those graft unions that have actually compartmentalized or closed, healed quite well. We want to look for also graft unions that don't have really excessive kinks in them. That can become problematic later in life, just simply because not every graft union is always going to connect really well to that rootstock. So I like to select those that have the nicest, straightest trunk that you can possibly find. Now, it's not critical that it be perfect. One additional comment I'd like to bring up is we want to be really aware of any major trunk injuries on trees that we're potentially going to purchase. When I see a trunk injury like this, especially that low on the plant, this is one I would certainly avoid. But those injuries commonly will form higher up in the canopy as well. Now, that's oftentimes because these nursery plants will very regularly get moved around the nursery. Now, that can lead to some injuries. We see this tree also has a pretty fair amount of girdling roots. We're starting to get abundant suckers off of that rootstock. So this is certainly a species that I wouldn't actually grab, or a tree I wouldn't, pick. Now, if you need help selecting an appropriate species for your site, feel free to reach out to me. I have a wonderful list of species that do well, especially on difficult sites. We know our urban soils can always be challenging. I've left my contact information at the end of this video, and I'd love to hear from you. Thank you all for watching again today. I hope you have a great rest of your week.